The moon has no atmosphere, no air to breathe, no pressure to hold a human body together, no shield against radiation or the sun's unfiltered light. Surface temperatures swing from 127 degrees Celsius in direct sunlight to minus 173 degrees Celsius in shadow. A single step from light into darkness means crossing a thermal barrier more extreme than anything on Earth. There is no weather, no wind, no sound, only silence, dust, and the constant awareness that survival depends entirely on the integrity of a pressurized suit and the limited resources carried from 250,000 miles away. Between 1969 and 1972, 12 men from NASA's Apollo program walked on this surface. They did not conquer it. They survived it. The lunar module was not built for comfort. It was a skeletal frame of aluminum alloy, mylar insulation, and just enough fuel to land and lift off once. Inside, 2 astronauts stood in a cabin barely larger than a telephone booth, surrounded by switches, circuit breakers, and life support systems with no backup. The cabin pressure was maintained at 5 psi, roughly 1/3 of Earth's atmosphere, using pure oxygen. This kept the structure light, but introduced catastrophic fire risk, a lesson learned during the Apollo 1 1 ground test that killed 3 astronauts in 1967. On the Moon, a spark, a short circuit, or a tear in the cabin wall would mean immediate depressurization. There would be no time to fix it. The crew would lose consciousness in 15 seconds. The Extra Vehicular Mobility Unit, the Apollo spacesuit, was the only barrier between an astronaut and vacuum. It was a self-contained spacecraft worn on the body. 14 layers of aluminized mylar, neoprene-coated nylon, and Dacron provided thermal insulation and micrometeorite protection. A portable life support system backpack supplied oxygen, removed carbon dioxide, cooled the body with circulating water, and maintained pressure. The suit weighed 180 pounds on Earth, 30 pounds in lunar gravity. It was stiff, restrictive, and exhausting to move in. Gloves were thick enough to prevent puncture, but made fine motor tasks nearly impossible. The helmet visor was coated with gold to reflect solar radiation, but visibility was limited. Peripheral vision was gone. Astronauts had to turn their entire torso to see left or right. Every moonwalk was a calculated risk. The portable life support system carried enough oxygen, water, and battery power for 7 hours. That included a safety margin. Mission rules required astronauts to return to the lunar module with at least 1 hour of consumables remaining. If they wandered too far, if they fell and damaged the backpack, if a seal failed or a valve stuck, there was no rescue. The lunar module could not move. There were no spare suits. Ground control in Houston, 3 light seconds away, could offer advice but not assistance. Astronauts rehearsed emergency procedures, but the moon offered no second chances. The surface itself was hostile. Lunar regolith, the fine dust covering the moon, was not like sand. It was jagged, electrostatically charged, and clung to everything. It abraded seals, clogged zippers, scratched visors, and infiltrated the lunar module cabin despite efforts to brush it off. It smelled like spent gunpowder when brought inside. Engineers worried it could compromise the door seal or jam the hatch. On Apollo 12, astronaut Alan Bean accidentally pointed the color television camera at the sun, destroying it within seconds. The mission continued without video documentation. On Apollo 15, a small water leak inside the cabin forced the crew to sleep in their suits one night, uncertain whether the environmental control system would hold. These were not dramatic failures. They were quiet erosions of safety margin. Temperature management was constant. In sunlight, the surface absorbed heat, and suit cooling systems ran at full capacity to prevent overheating. The astronauts' core temperature could rise dangerously if the water Xunhuan system failed. In shadow, heat drained away instantly. There was no gradual cooling. The suit's electrical heating elements activated automatically, but if power failed, hypothermia would set in within minutes. On Apollo 14, astronaut Edgar Mitchell's heart rate spiked to 128 beats per minute during a steep climb to Cone Crater, pulling a wheeled cart of equipment through deep regolith. He was approaching heat exhaustion. Mission Control ordered a rest stop. The margin between operational and incapacitated was thin. Inside the lunar module, life support was equally fragile. The environmental control system recycled cabin air, removing carbon dioxide with lithium hydroxide canisters. These had a limited capacity. If a moonwalk ran long, if the schedule slipped, if the crew had to extend their surface stay, the canisters would saturate and CO2 levels would rise. The crew would experience headaches, confusion, and respiratory distress before losing consciousness. Water was rationed. The module carried just enough for drinking and cooling. There was no shower, no way to wash. Astronauts lived in their suits for days, urinating into collection bags, eating freeze-dried food, sleeping in hammocks strung across the cabin. The smell was overwhelming. Sweat, urine, and unwashed bodies in a sealed metal box the size of a closet. Sleep was nearly impossible. The cabin was cold, noisy with fans and pumps, and filled with the anxiety of knowing that a single system's failure could end everything. Astronauts slept in shifts, one monitoring instruments while the other tried to rest. On Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin barely slept at all during their 21-hour stay on the surface. Adrenaline, discomfort, and the weight of the mission kept them awake. Armstrong's heart rate, monitored continuously, rarely dropped below 90 beats per minute. They were exhausted before the ascent engine even fired. Radiation was invisible but constant. Without Earth's magnetic field or atmosphere, cosmic rays and solar particles passed straight through the lunar module's thin walls and the astronauts' bodies. Dosimeters recorded exposure levels. A single solar flare during a moonwalk could deliver a lethal dose in hours. Mission planners monitored solar activity obsessively. Apollo 16 launched during a solar minimum, when flare risk was lowest, but the threat was always present. Astronauts saw flashes of light with their eyes closed, phosphenes caused by cosmic rays striking their retinas. It was a reminder that space was hostile at the molecular level. Communication with Earth provided psychological reassurance, but also isolation. Radio signals took 3 seconds to travel each way, creating a 6-second delay in conversation. This lag made rapid troubleshooting difficult. If something went wrong, astronauts had to act immediately, without waiting for ground control's input. On Apollo 13, an oxygen tank explosion in the service module forced the crew to abort the moon landing and use the lunar module as a lifeboat for 4 days. They survived because of discipline, improvisation, and accepting that rescue was uncertain. The moon missions were predicated on the assumption that help might not arrive. The ascent from the lunar surface was the most vulnerable moment. The ascent engine had no backup. It had to fire perfectly on the first attempt. If it failed, the crew would be stranded. There was no abort option, no second engine, no way to return to the command module orbiting overhead. Engineers designed the engine to be as simple and reliable as possible, using hypergolic propellants that ignited on contact without an ignition system. But simplicity did not eliminate risk. On Apollo 11, a circuit breaker inside the lunar module was accidentally broken by Aldrin's backpack. It was the breaker that armed the ascent engine. Without it, they could not leave. Aldrin used a felt-tip pen to push the breaker contact closed. It worked, They lifted off. A plastic pen saved 2 lives. The Apollo program succeeded because it operated within known limits. Engineers calculated fuel margins, oxygen reserves, and thermal tolerances with obsessive precision. Astronauts trained until procedures became reflex. Mission rules were inflexible. If a checklist said to abort, they aborted. If a system showed a fault, they did not proceed. The moon allowed no improvisation beyond what had been rehearsed. No heroics, no last-minute saves, only discipline and the acceptance that survival was conditional. 12 men walked on the moon and returned, not because they were invincible, but because they understood how close they were to death at every moment. They moved slowly, conserved resources, followed protocols, and trusted that the engineering would hold. The moon did not care about courage or determination. It was indifferent. Survival depended on respecting that indifference, on knowing that space does not forgive mistakes, and that the only margin for error was the one built into the machines and carried in the discipline of the crew. The Apollo astronauts survived extreme cold, vacuum, and darkness not by conquering the moon, but by accepting its terms and staying within the narrow envelope of safety that their technology and training provided. That is the only way anyone has ever survived on the moon. That is the only way anyone ever will.